Welcome to Book Rising, a podcast by the Radical Books Collective.
Hi everyone, this is Meg Arenberg, your host for today's episode of Book Rising and the next in our series on the future of radical publishing. Today, I'm delighted to have Mike Ma and Devin Clancy from Toronto-based Between the Lines Press here with me in the studio. Mike is a longtime member of Between the Lines' editorial committee and is also faculty in the Department of Criminology at Kwantlen Polytechnic University in British Columbia, and was also a longtime community advocacy and social justice organizer in Toronto. Devin is Between the Lines' design and production manager and an editorial member of the radical magazine Upping the Ante. Welcome to you both.
Hello, thank you.
Hello, Meg. Thank you for inviting us.
It's great to be here with you. So Mike and Devin, Between the Lines has been publishing nonfiction since 1977 with an explicit focus on social justice movements and books amplifying the struggles of racialized communities, migrants, women, queer folks, and the working class. You've published such international leftist luminaries as Noam Chomsky and Silvia Federici. And just in 2020, your press co-founded the Radical Publishers Alliance. So you've been an active part in building a larger coalition of anti-capitalist publishers across the West and with some member presses in the Global South. Could you tell us a bit of the story of Between the Lines, how all this began?
Sure. So as you mentioned, the press was founded in 1977. And it was an actual collaboration from two existing social movement groups, one being the Development Education Center based in Toronto, which, among many of its activities ran an organizational space for meetings, also did adult education, had a community radio station and a leftist library. And the other organization based out of Kitchener, Ontario, the Dumont Press Graphix, which was a typography collective. So these two organizations kind of emerged in that new left, the heady days of the late 60s, early 70s, and formed a publishing house to kind of, create a space for publishing long form books beyond the pamphlets and things that they were already involved in. So, I think we're a unique publisher in that a lot of what we do and how we do it is informed by those initial groups. So we operate with a non-hierarchical mandate, and all decisions are made collectively by everyone involved in the press. I'm one of 4 staff members, but we're not the ones that make the decisions. We actually are informed by a broader editorial committee in deciding, what to publish and how to make an impact on the publishing landscape in Canada. Mike, did you want to expand?
Yeah, I mean, I can add that, I do think the origins of BTL, it comes out of that 70s vibe, right? In the sense of people being involved with the left, these kind of leftist struggles, and then other types of kind of urban resistance and urban organizing. And social justice organizing. And then over the last 50 years, or if you will, or not 50, but the last few decades, I think it is morphed, right, in that sense, into what it is. It started out having a storefront, actually, and now we're a book publisher. So I think that it's an interesting, long kind of trajectory that brought, if you will, BTL to what it is now, which is a publisher of nonfiction, in particular, social justice related titles. So I think that's how it began. But I would say it still has that, if you will, those beginnings, because correct me if I'm wrong, Devin, there's 3 members or original members, founding members that are still on the editorial board. So we still have, although that foundation was so long ago, and I joined probably now about 14 years ago, that, it's quite different now, and the politics have shifted. And if you also, the imagination, I think, of struggle and what publishing is has shifted. And so I think that BTL now reflects, I think, the present, although it's still connected to that past.
And could you talk a little bit about how you go about, choosing what to publish? How how do you get your titles?
Well, I can start, Devin. I would say that we, as Devin mentioned, we are a collective, right? One of our, we like to say that we publish books without bosses, right? We're a flat organization, and so unlike many publishers, we are actually a collective. So we meet every month. Now, because of the pandemic, on Zoom. And also because now I'm in Vancouver, but most of the other editorial boards are in Toronto. So Zoom actually works quite well for me, where we have a fulsome discussion of book proposals and manuscripts that come our way. So it really is an organic process, I think. So, I mean, what is the selection criteria, or how do we get our books? I think people know about the press. And they submit books that think has a good fit with the other books that we publish, and I guess now we have a certain reputation and name for publishing certain titles, and so those types of authors would approach us with, if you will, manuscripts or book proposals. We review them, and we have a very, very vigorous. There's usually about 12 people on the editorial board, or more sometimes. And so it's a very dynamic conversation. I mean, to be honest, like there's a lot of disagreement about what we should or what we shouldn't publish. And there's lots of agreement about what we should publish and what we shouldn't publish. And so I think that's what's quite exciting about being on the editorial board. And that's why I actually, I've been there for a while now, not as long as some of the older members, the founding members, but certainly it's so exciting because I don't think there is, another, correct me if I'm wrong, Devin, I don't think there is another nonfiction press in Canada that operates in this way, right? That operates as a collective. What do you think, Devin?
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. Not that I know. I mean, there are other projects that are certainly collective, but maybe not in the book publishing world. But I think that is, like Mike said, one of our strengths, where we do have this conversation among, I think there's 17 of us on total, like as part of the editorial collective. And, it fluctuates how many people are able to join that conversation, but it's quite a representative group of people. There's folks there that represent the labor movement, folks involved in indie media projects or part of journalism, music journalism, of course, folks that are involved in academia, but also a lot of community organizers and people with, a foot in both worlds. So I think doing things collectively is like our strength, as well as in some cases it can be a challenge, right? To how do you find the right direction when you have so many cooks in the kitchen? But
I would agree. We definitely don't have a hive mind. Like there's a lot of disagreement, and obviously that is an absolute strength, right? Because people are not just on the same page about things, right? And so there's very diplomatic and very friendly and constructive debate, but debate nonetheless. So I think that's really great, right? Because I bet you that's absent in a lot of book publishing, where there's not that vigorous debate.
Yeah, and it's also quite intergenerational, more than a lot of spaces I've experienced in organizing, where we do have those connections that extend all the way back to the 70s. And those a few folks are still on that committee and help make those decisions. So yeah, I think it's a really unique kind of space for debate, and like the name of the press suggests, it doesn't repeat a particular line or a particular political stripe, but we actually kind of take in manuscripts that represent kind of the diversity of leftist perspectives, from Marxist or anarchist takes to folks that maybe don't identify with those strains of thinking, but nonetheless bring a critical perspective.
Yeah. And do you think that sort of structure as a collective also what colors your posture with regard to other presses as well. I mentioned that you've been involved in building coalitions with other presses. I'm just curious how the one relates to the other. What value there is in building these larger networks.
That's a great question. I think it does. Did you want to go?
Well, I was just going to jump in that I think really, one of the things is, I think the resistance of, and the fear of big book, right? And big publishers and I guess, behemoths like Amazon. So I think that's part of it as well. I think in the sense that, I don't know where I'm going with that, but I think there is, I think, a desire to respond to that, right? Yeah, to respond to that kind of hegemony of publishing.
Yeah, I would just say that our editorial collective is grounded in social movements and always has been, and I think that connection to collectively organizing for a better future has certainly influenced our desire to kind of grow the ecosystem of leftist work. So part of that includes the Radical Publishers group that we were part of founding at the beginning of the pandemic. And there's other indie media organizations and publications that we partner with a lot, whether that's through co-publishing books in Canada with AK Press or Pluto Press and Verso as well, or partnering with more grassroots magazines like Briar Patch Magazine, which is also based in Canada. I think we've learned through our practice that collectively organizing is can bring a sense of, it can bring a strength that otherwise wouldn't exist, if you're just sort of isolated. And so approaching kind of the broader world of publishing with that in mind has been a great strength.
Yeah, I mean, during the pandemic, just to build off what Devin has said, during the pandemic, the term mutual aid has come up a lot, right? In terms of thinking about how to survive this, these uncertain times. And I think this notion of mutual aid is a good word to kind of think about why we would want to build, if you will, linkages, networks, or solidarity with other people of like mind and all in publishing. And I think you do have to do that because, nonfiction publishing, especially with a concentration or interest in social justice or left titles, is a precarious business. So I think, I think many presses are always, on the edge of not publishing anymore, right? So I think we do have to build, if you will, an international network of people who support each other and who come to each other's aid, I think, and also just lend support and share ideas, right? I think that's really the important thing about how to actually survive these uncertain times. So I think that's actually, I think I see it as a strategy for survival, actually.
Yeah. I mean, since you brought up Amazon, I was going to ask you, how as a small anti-capitalist press you take on these, these corporate, booksellers and corporate publishers that are increasingly powerful. I mean, I think even, in this period of the pandemic have exponentially grown their power.
I don't know.
That's a question that can be answered. Yeah.
Devin?
Sure. I would say that, it's part of the contradictions of publishing, right? You're going to be competing with, or at least kind of to some degree, have your toes inside the kind of behemoths of Amazon or Chapters Indigo in Canada, or all the other kind of major mega box stores, or delivery services. And so we sort of reluctantly do host our books on those services, but I think in our own, and the reason we do that is because as much as we want to stay true to our beliefs in terms of collectively running things, collectively owning things, we want to meet people where they're at, and Amazon is a fact of modern life. So we reluctantly engage in those, but I think in our own practice we're trying to build up partnerships with local bookstores that kind of embody the ideals that we publish about, and partner with other radical publishers to kind of cross promote each other's titles and direct people either to the publisher themselves or to their local bookstore, and to try to support an alternative beyond those kinds of mega corporate approaches to publishing.
I also think, many years ago, we published a title called "No One Makes You Shop at Walmart." And it makes me, that title jumps into my head, because I think, no one makes you shop at Amazon, but the reality of the situation is that many people do shop through online vendors, especially now because of the pandemic and isolation and stores being closed, right? So I think there has been a push, and certainly we've been absolutely very kinetically pushed online. We're meeting online right now, right, Meg? So I do think the online world is a reality, and online shopping is a reality. And so if you're not in that, if you will, vendor space, then you won't survive, I think. So I do think that everyone has to be part of online, has to have some foot in the online ecosphere, and also participate, I think, with Big Bad Book, right? Like, in the sense that I don't know how to resist it. We do sell our titles, electronic titles, for instance, or ebooks, through our website, but I do think people are buying those titles also, through other vendors, right? Like Amazon, and the physical books as well, right? So I think, there's no clear answer to it, I think. I mean, how can you, yes, you can decide not to shop at Walmart, but yeah, I just think that there's many people in the world that might think that's the only place to get stuff. And so if you want to reach them, you have to offer things in those spaces as well. It's a conundrum. It's an aporia. I don't think it's not something we can pass through or fix, I think, not from our perspective. Yeah.
Well, maybe another way to approach the question is sort of what would it take, what would need to change for independent radical publishing to thrive? What does the next decade or a few decades look like in a world where those presses are thriving?
I would say that the challenges to publishing are also the challenges that people face generally. So gentrification is, I think, one of the major challenges to operating a successful publishing business, but also, a successful independent bookstore, for instance. So, the very same challenges that we're facing in social movements are the ones that are affecting, us as trying to run a business. So I think, collective organizing is the best, to struggle to make the conditions better is the best that we can do. And struggle is always better when it's collective and it's broad-based. So I think trying to grow the connections between publishers, but then also the connections between publishers and bookstores that are outside of those systems is probably the best we can do. But at the same time, we have to push for greater access to accessible and affordable space in our cities. this is an issue with social movements as well. More and more our spaces for coming together are being kind of taken out from under our feet, and instead being replaced by these sort of mega condo structures. That's kind of seems to be what's happening in Toronto, but across the world, and all these global cities are being progressively colonized by the mega rich, and it's becoming harder and harder to have an alternative space. So fighting for greater supports for small independent businesses is one plank of making the future better, and for carving out space for radical folks. And I think working together to try to cross promote and get our perspectives out into the world as much as possible.
Yeah.
Devin, you bring up an interesting question, this notion of radical space. And I'm just thinking of the classroom I was just teaching last night. And so, I'm trying to think like, I teach at Kwantlen Polytechnic University, which is basically a school whose population is made up of, I'd say, working class. I mean, I know it's a kind of an older term of reference, but it's still useful. Working class or even low socioeconomic status, most of my students, right? So these are students who typically really think about, should I buy this book for the course? Or can I just like borrow it from the library? Or maybe I don't even need it at all. Maybe I can find an electronic version of it online, illegally somewhere. And then I could just download that book, and then I don't have to buy it. So I'm thinking, like, how do we make that a radical space, right? So it's not just about absolutely, I agree with you, Devin, we have to make these spaces available. And that's, I think, one of the mandates of BTL. But at the same time, how do you bring BTL into the classroom, into more conventional spaces, right, that are not radical, right? This is the academy, right? This is a place where we charge very high tuition for people who can't afford it. And so it's a business, right? It's a non-radical space. So how do you bring the radical into the classroom? I mean, through the ideas that you're teaching, but certainly also how do you access those ideas through books? And so the question also of like the cost of books, access to books, and whether students can can get their hands on those books, that becomes a big issue actually for these spaces where you're trying to expand people's consciousness, or you're trying to capture their imagination, or even try to explain what capitalism is, right? And what ways in which we can resist it. That is difficult to do, I think, in a classroom. And so books help to do that, but books also cost money. So I mean, I don't. This is a kind of unthought out idea, but it makes me think that there's also a contradiction in the classroom where so many of these books are used, right? In the sense of it being this for-profit space where we're trying to bring these kind of anti-capitalist ideas into the space while at the same time trying to sell books. So I think it's a complicated question. Yeah. Making space is complicated. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that. And, the university as a corporation is, in many ways, it's kind of mirrors the way that, Amazons and the other corporations have taken over and are producing students as, a product at the end, right? Or they're selling a certain product, which, again, like Amazon, we're involved in that project to some degree, although I think in our practice, we're always cognizant of the fact that books can be extremely expensive, especially when it comes to academic work. So between the lines, we're always, trying to keep costs down as much as possible from a production standpoint. So we use as much recycled paper as possible, some of the cheapest stocks that we can access that are recyclable. But at the same time, we always try to print union shop. And so there's the contradictions inherent in capitalism are inherent in the way that we publish, but some of the ways that we've tried to mitigate that is by keeping prices down as low as we can on paperbacks, and also selling cheaper ebooks for folks. And I think one of the promising elements of ebook production is that you can actually create a much more accessible document that is accessible both in terms of cost and in terms of gaining access to it online, but also in a very practical sense, accessible for people with print disabilities or other disabilities. So I think when we're thinking about radical change for independent publishers, all of these questions about accessibility in the context of capitalism, I think, are essential, and trying to make your the ideas as accessible as possible is forefront, is in the front of mind for us between the lines.
One thing that I'd like to share with you, Meg, and your listeners, is that, at the beginning of the pandemic, we actually did something kind of weird. Like, we jumped into a weird experiment. We published an ebook that was pay what you can. And it was actually, if you will, I guess, a group or crowdsourced volume about the pandemic. So it was called Sick of the System. And so it was getting authors that we had published before and other authors that we haven't write short pieces, which we, as actually, I think it's the first time we've done this, Devin, we as the kind of editorial committee, we actually put it together and made it available as an ebook. And then you would go to our website, and then it would be, there would be a suggested price, but you can buy it for like 1 cent, right? Or 0 cents if you want. And so I think that was weirdly successful because, many people did, I think, see it as a way of, saying, well, I could pay more than, 10 cents. So I'll pay $10 for that, right? So I think it also, I think it was in the height of the pandemic. We published it, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Devin, April 2020. It was the fastest book ever put together. I think we put it from start to finish. We put it together in like 4 weeks. Wow. Or 6 weeks. It's very, very, in terms of publishing, that's crazy. That's madness, right? But we did it. And I think we want to do it because we want to respond to the pandemic and all of the crises that were happening. But there's a great example. I used that book for teaching. And I said to my students, you can pay nothing or you can pay what, I don't know what they paid in yet. But I think students, again, I teach in this kind of working class university. I think students appreciated that there was this thing that wasn't something that you could buy at Amazon, that you could purchase independently through this kind of pay what you can system. Mm-hmm. So I think that was quite innovative. It may not happen ever again, but certainly it was an experiment, and it certainly made me feel good that we were doing something, out of the box, and it was, innovative. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was successful in that I think people, on balance, did pay for the work of the collection, of the volume. Many people didn't pay anything, which was totally great, but also many people paid over and above the list price. So it's great. I think it's an example of readers seeing the value in a project and kind of bringing what they could and what they thought was reasonable to that. And we did end up donating those proceeds to the Migrant Rights Network, which is an organization that fights for the rights of migrant workers and non-status folks in Canada. So yeah, I think that it is a good example of some of the more novel ways that we can reach audiences and maintain a sort of an accessible publishing program.
Yeah, I'm just so proud of that volume, and also even more proud that we donated it to migrant workers. Solidarity, basically. Yeah.
Very cool. So Sick of the System. What other BTL radical titles should we all be reading?
Well, what about that mining, Devin? Maybe tell Meg about our recent mining book.
Yeah, I think this is kind of an interesting sort of full circle moment for the press. So in 77, the first book that we published was a sort of a critique of Inco, which is the big mining company at the time, called The Big Nickel. And so it was a sort of scathing critique of Inco's work, both running a mine in Sudbury and also kind of internationally, the mining corporation's effects on countries in Latin America, in particular Guatemala. So fast forward to this past fall, we recently published a book called Testimonial. It's about Canadian mining in the aftermath of genocides in Guatemala. And it's an edited volume by Catherine Nolan and Graham Russell, but they essentially cover the experience of Indigenous communities in Guatemala fighting against this sort of genocidal regimes of their governments and the complicity of mining projects in that violence. So it's a really powerful story that speaks to the contemporary neocolonialism in Guatemala and Canadian complicity in that, which I think is an important contribution to challenging this notion of Canada as a peacemaker or as a polite nation, etc. You know, most of the most wealthiest mining corporations are headquartered in Toronto and make lots and lots of profits on the destruction of Indigenous homelands across the globe. So I would say definitely check out Testimonial, and it kind of follows up on that strain of anti-imperial, anti-colonial books that we've published since the very beginning.
And I thought, and also maybe your listeners might also be interested in as some of the backstory. If people Google Testimonial, and do a bit of a deeper dive, they'll see that it was actually a manuscript that was supposed to be published by another press, but because of certain fears, legal fears, they dropped that book, and that's why we picked it up. So there's that story as well, in the sense that we, again, another proud moment, I think, for our press, that we came and kind of, if not saved it, certainly helped resurrect this manuscript and published it when it was actually, it was dropped by another press. So because of fear of legal action, right? Because it's a critique of mining, right? In particular, certain corporations. So that's certainly one title, I think, Testimonial.
I'd also plug a forthcoming book that we're really excited about. So coming this April, we're publishing Disarm, Defund, Dismantle, which is an edited volume about abolition organizing in Canada. So it's just a really great collection that features a lot of important community organizations, including the Toronto Prisoners' Rights Project, the Defund the Police Coalition in Montreal, as well as the Free Lands, Free People Project, based out of Treaty 6 in the Prairies. So it's that's just a small snapshot of what's included in the volume, but I think it's sort of building up a kind of rigorous study of how do you actually bring abolition politics to the mainstream, and how can you struggle for the decarceration and the sort of the destruction of the prison industrial complex, and of course how that affects in particular Black and Indigenous communities in Canada. So I definitely encourage your listeners to check out what's forthcoming, and I think it's an important contribution to that field of research.
And also, again, for your listeners, social justice and left politics doesn't always have to be dire and serious, because we also publish graphic novels or graphic. They're not novels. What I'm saying, they're graphic books. But we have a book called Wonder Drug, which is basically a graphic illustrated history of LSD. So that's also available on our website. So I think we also publish. What I'm trying to say is that I think we also publish things that I think are visually interesting to look at too. So not just we print books with pictures too. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. So if some of your listeners want to buy picture books, we have those as well, and we and I think Wonder Drug is a great book.
Right on. Mike, Devin, thank you so much for your time. It's been great to talk to you both.
Thank you so
Thanks.
much for inviting us. Yeah, it's
Thanks
been a
for having
great
us.
conversation. Thank you. Yeah.